Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, or whatever time of the day you're probably watching this. I am Adi Balimbingan. I'm one of the CAP for the Philippine Intercollegiate Debate Championship 2026. And today I will be delivering a gendered media lecture as part of our lecture series entitled Women and Gender Minorities in Media. With that being said, what are the contents of this presentation? First, we ought to understand what gendered media is. And then an important actor in media, at least in the Philippine landscape, is MTRCB. Of course, some communication theories I've learned throughout my years that could be helpful in debate, but also just a historical background of the Philippine cinema so that we can be able to discuss timeline when you ought to be debating regrets motion and even value assessment motions. And then we will then dive deep in Filipino cinema, recent Philippine cinema. And I would like to dig deeper with Vice Ganda and their impact within the media landscape in the country or in the Philippines because I feel like it is not widely talked about. But at the same time, I feel like it's not given justice because most of the presentation, the discussion about Vice Ganda are always just criticism in the debate. And I feel like it's important to know how the evolution of Vice Ganda and its cultural impact within the country and the media landscape is discussed. And then film strategies that they definitely employ so that we can reimagine or at least be able to truly see the strategies when it comes to employing narratives within the kind of media that is famous, popular, and amazing in the context of the Philippines. And of course, some conclusions which I think I wanted to impart in this very, very short lecture that I hope you have something to learn from. That being said, let's start with the first one. Understanding gendered media. Gendered media just definitely refers to how media industries create, portray, distribute, and normalize ideas about gender identities, gender roles, sexuality, masculinity, femininity, and queerness. I believe that debate in itself have been able to impart some knowledge on not just general gender identities, but how we generally explore gender roles. And I believe the trend now is just being able to dive deep and truly understanding the idea of masculinity and femininity down to queerness that have expanded just beyond knowing who lesbian and gays are, because there are tons of trans motions that have been filled out in the future. I personally feel like media and gender goes hand in hand when it comes to discussing them because a lot of the narratives right now, specifically in the country like the Philippines, because of huge visibility that we have, such as that when it comes to political power or political presence in the country, I believe that the best tool for the gender minorities in the country is really just media representation. It really is as strong in comparison to other Western countries, such as that. It is important for us to discuss that media does not simply reflect society because it actively shapes things such as perceptions of men and women, ideas of acceptable gender expression, beauty standards, traumatic expectations, family structures, sexual norms, and public attitudes toward LGBTQIA plus identities. When it comes to perception of women, we have seen a shift of how gender roles are being seen. You have seen a lot of CEO roles that are given towards women, which is reflective of the change in society. But even more so, gender expression have expanded a lot, such as that we see goth representation in the country in itself with the pandemic, with the rise of the BL and GL series. I don't think we were as successful when it comes to the Thailand BL system and even the Chinese BL success, Taiwan even. But I believe it is still at par with us being able to release films and movies that are out there to just share the struggles and stories of a lot of gender uh, gender minorities that are present. Beauty standards, and I feel like that is something that is being pushed and seen, such as that it's not only in media, you have the big pageant scene in the country, which I think is part of this, but I'm not really gonna dive deeper, such as that I believe that is another aspect or another lecture that I can go on. Romantic expectations as well, with not only maybe a film culture to say the very least, but it's the idea of finding lifelong partners, such as that you have romantic relationships, love teams that extended even towards gender minorities in the present. Of course, family structures, and while I think it is not normalized, but we have seen several themes and stories that revolve around chosen families. I believe that we're already breaking through it, and even sexual norms and how promiscuity and just the ability to be affectionate towards your chosen loved ones, individuals, specifically, queer love in the present is something that is heavily seen and portrayed, such as that, of course, we go still towards public attitude toward LGBTQIA plus identities. And I believe there's still a huge misconception towards this relationship, but even more so, a lot of backlash and hate towards people who are openly showing their love. But there is progress insofar as we are seeing media with recently in PBB, you have a queer couple entering in, which is Dongpat, to say the very least. And for individuals and for mainstream media to just feature a lot of these love stories, even in Kapuso Mo Jessica Soho, means that the ability to talk about it and have discourse means that there is value in these kinds of things. Still, then, in the Philippine context, media plays an essentially powerful role because one, television and film are highly accessible. Unlike in other countries, I believe people are still drawn towards media. Batang Quiapo, from the FPJ, the success of FPJ Sang Provinciano is still well talked about. But even in the country, I think a lot of people still owns television, specifically in the far-flung areas. Celebrity culture is deeply influential. Like, we really love our celebrities here in the countries, that the kind of parasocial relationship that extend within people. Media often substitute for formal sex or gender education, such as that a lot of the hard discussions in school or is expected to be talked about in school and education system and even in households are things that we ought to hear in media. And I believe it just talks about like the detachment within family members that talks about it because it's a bit awkward due to the kind of relationship and respect and like the you trying to be formal or to say to not cross sexual boundaries within the country. So it is a lot easier for these to be talked about by third party actors. The Philippines also has very strong and religious conservative influences, such as that in the past we have the teleserie just dominating primetime media, such as that a lot of these stories as well are being around this. I believe these are things that you already are well aware of, but also entertainment is intertwined with politics and social identity. And I believe this is where the evolution currently faces in because a lot of the political situations and the realistic scenarios and realities of women and gender minorities as portrayed in media are things that also have progressed, such as that we no longer just talk about patriarchy and misogyny, but we talk about other challenging issues and even the celebration of women through things such as that their access to abortion, their ability to be able to have their own careers and jobs, and even just balancing motherhood that extends beyond them being able to take care of their husband or so. Now let's talk about an important actor in this debate, and that's the Movie and Television Review and Classification Board that regulates and classifies Philippine film and television content. So their main responsibility just looks at the film classification, censorship, content review, and protecting audiences from harmful material. And a lot of these manifest in the way media is one produced and are tagged in the Philippine cinema before it is released to the public, such as it is the same with television. You have the general patronage, parental guidance, and then the strict parental guidance, and then the R18, and then you have the X-rated, which are things that are not released in films. And these are things that are important because MPRCB, insofar as they should remain neutral because it is not controlled, it's an independent body that is not controlled by the government. They can act as their own, plays a huge role because it determines which kind of films or which parts of several films and stories become aired in the movie. But even more so, they're not just proactive, they're also very active, that they can take away content and even license us or suspend these story afternoon shows and stories to be published within the public the moment they cross the line. And they play an important role because, again, it safeguards a lot of children and even just general individuals to be exposed to the kind of content they put out. Of course, on the extreme, misinformation, disinformation, insofar as did they really do a good job? I think, in a general sense, MTRCB is functional and has been able to do its mandate in the country. Historically done, and this is important to argue, the criticism towards MTRCB, and we're gonna talk about as an average reasonable person, and just on the viewpoint of gendered media, is that they face criticism for their conservative standards, such as that it's always acting upon the idea that we are a religious country, such as that there have been limits on things that are put out there, specifically those ones that are pretty bold in discussing things such as, like, just normalization of gender identities and other parts of it, specifically within relationship. The next thing is just restricting sexual content. And if you ask me, one of the issues here is that you see Viva Max just mass producing and leading actually the digital platforms. If you do know, and if you can check on Google, Viva Max is actually one, if not the top, one of the top digital streaming platforms in the country, such as that it allows for people. And if you've heard about Bomba films during martial law, it was a strategy to distract individuals with everything that is happening around us. And some scholars and some individuals have parallelized it to the birth of Viva Max with how the BBM Sara and even just the end of Duterte scene distracted a lot of individuals to talk about the more important things and issues in the country. I have a batchmate to actually do the thesis about this. But the next is regulating queer intimacy differently. And we've seen this manifest in the issue with Vice Ganda and Ion with the cake icing, and they were suspended for about 2 weeks or a month or so, when in fact the a lot of stories and a lot of proof within Twitter and Facebook have come out that these are things that there are worse things than interactions and even jokes that were put out there by straight men like Joey De Leon and Vic Soto on live television, but they weren't suspended at that time. But when implicit things or actions that is pretty harmless, such as that feeding your boyfriend and husband, are things seen as immoral because it is done by a queer individual or queer couple in the present or in live public audience. But they reinforce moral conservatism, such as that it validates a lot of the belief of individuals that are currently there. And just a background, Shara Soto is the current chairperson of MTRCB. Shara Soto is the daughter of the current senator Tito Soto, and she just does a lot of these things fairly, and they double down on a lot of the videos. And if you see MTRCB and the way they do their PR right now, it is still centered upon like family and just a lot of the conservative ideals of what it is supposed to be. Critics argue then that censorship often reflects religious conservatism, but the heteronormative morality, again, what crosses the line and where they cross the boundary is when it is done by a queer couple or a women gender minority, but also anxiety toward queer sexuality because suddenly indoctrination is something that is harmful because exposure of individuals or young kids towards this is harmful towards them, such as that it is so normalized to see heteronormative heterosexual couple like kiss or have sex scenes and be aired out in the television. And MTRCB isn't as punitive when it comes to these relationships and portrayal. But again, the moment it is done by queer couples or it is exercised by anything romantic by queer individuals within film and television and stories, that's where they eventually have backlash and draw the line. The next thing is that queer narratives were often forced to reduce intimacy and avoid explicit affection. And while I think these are general things that to viewpoint for it to be exposed to actual audiences, more people, but these are things that are allowed when it comes to heteronormative couple. So when you try to regulate and censor, at least it should be a blanket policy, or at least a uniform way of reinforcing these regulations to the content that is produced, and not just limited towards for these individuals in the present. The contemporary issue now then is within streaming era challenges, because platforms like Netflix and YouTube challenge traditional censorship systems, because one, audiences access uncensored international media, things that of course MTRCB does not have a power on. The next thing is that digital content spreads beyond state regulation. I believe that the closest one we had is like the taxation of digital streaming platforms within Netflix that was passed on both Congress and the Senate, such as that now, of course, the cost of you being able to have streaming platforms is easier. But insofar as regulating content is concerned, this is something that MTRCB still needs to work on, such as that there are effective structures for them to do it, because it is done pretty well in Western context, but in the Philippines, it isn't. And when you go to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, you definitely can just look at specifically TikTok, and you can just like see everything. And while reactive or other policy and proactive ways of like blocking, etc., or like streaming, filtering words, or those kinds of things, there's also like YouTube Kids version. There's still a challenge because the huge web or the internet is something that is really, really, really hard to regulate. Let's go then now to something that is more objective when it comes to us being able to discuss different types of content within media. And I'd like to share several communication theories related to gendered media. The first thing is that cultivation theory by George Gerbner. It basically just says that long-term exposure to media shapes how audiences perceive reality. So repeated portrayals of flamboyant gay characters can normalize visibility, but also reinforce stereotypes. And specific viewpoints of a lot of individuals, especially now, is that to say that, well, they're not gay because they're masculine and they don't wear makeup or so. But I believe now we're able to understand the different varieties of soft and so masculinity and femininity within gender expression, depending upon your gender. That doesn't depend on your gender and sexuality, to say the very least, because those are pretty different things when it comes to those. So that's cultivation theory, like long-term exposure. Next thing is representation theory. Media constructs meaning through representation. It's the way women and queer people are portrayed influences how society generally understands them, such as that I believe in the 2000s and early 2010s, you have Heart Evangelista, Angelica Panganiban just showing the Kikay look, Julina Magdangal, those kinds of representation of what it is to be a girl when there are masked girls that are present. The same way, queer people were all limited to the way Roderick Paulate is presenting themselves, but also like Boya Bunda is already in television at that time, such as that it's still very toned down in comparison to what we have in the present. Later on, I'll manifest a little bit of the better way or the more obvious way of trying to represent these kinds of things and the way we have seen it in the past. The next thing is the male gaze theory by Laura Mulvey, and it's that traditional cinema often frames women from a heterosexual male perspective. Women are frequently romanticized, sexualized, or positioned around male narratives, so their ability to satisfy a man. You have the third-party culture, the kabit, excuse me, the kabit culture. There has been an influx of it in the past. I believe that there has been a bit low on it, but there are still some. So you've had like Ika-anim na Utos series, but you can literally name a lot of it, and it is centered upon these kinds of things that are almost repetitively done, and a lot of this just satisfies the male gaze on a lot of women just pushing pull nag-aagawan ng mag-asawa or ng boyfriend girlfriend, legal wives as well. Just throwing out some examples there that you probably have seen within mainstream media. Let's talk about then the next one, which is queer theory, and it challenges fixed ideas of gender and sexuality, such as that queer readings of Philippine films analyze coded queer narratives, drag performance, camp aesthetics, resistance to heteronormativity, and this theory is pretty novel and contemporary, such as that you're able to truly discuss the kinds of representation that exist in the present. Those are the four things. And now we lead to historical background of gender representation then. And we just do a little bit of a historical timeline, such that we can go through it and understand where these are coming from. So in 1950s to 70s, you had women often portrayed as ideal mothers, martyrs, loyal wives, tragic heroines. Queer representations was minimal or heavily coded. I couldn't really pinpoint one, such as that. I think there was one by Dolphy. I'm not quite sure if this was in this era or 1980s or 1990s, such as that. Markova ang sinaunang, I forgot the title. But often, of course, you've seen this ideal mothers, martyrs, loyal wives, tragic heroines, to say the very least. Like you've had individuals come here in the past, like Hilda Coronel. Of course, we had Inshang, um, those kinds of things. 1980s, 1990s is the rise of melodrama and strong suffering women archetypes. Gay characters mostly are comedic relief, and LGBTQI plus identifies framed as secondary entertainment, such as that. They're just there to spice things up. They're not really there meaningfully. They just add up to something. It's not even their benefit to the story is pretty marginal. They're just put there as poster individuals. And this is where a little bit of representation is already happening. We then come to 2000 to 2010s, and there's more visible queer representation. There's the emergence of independent cinema exploring gender identity. Vice Ganda becomes a mainstream phenomenon. And if you don't know, Vice Ganda became mainstream at around 2009 when Showtime was released. But even then, at the very start of Showtime, the creators of It's Showtime only had Vice Ganda there as a 2 week judge, 2 week judge up until a lot of individuals, a lot of people just love Vice Ganda, and eventually they become a permanent judge, down to, of course, now them being one of the pillars of Philippine queer media. 2020s, now we have streaming platforms as the post-pandemic, allow more nuanced representations because you can now create content in your YouTube channel. It doesn't require you to submit it to MTRCB, but then increased discussion on trans identity, feminism, intersectionality, and queer politics. So now we're able to expand not just on the gay, but also other sorts of stories. So as I've shared, the lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and I believe it is also because of the kind of progress we have from the West that extend towards us in the Philippines. That's why our creators as well have been more bold, and the producers have been more bold to fund a lot of these content and stories. Although there's still minimal amounts of stories that are being funded right now, a lot of queer directors like Rodina Singh is able to push through in the mainstream cinema, but you've already had a lot of queer male directors, like gay men directors that are able to push through. But of course, their center is not always on queer stories. But you have direct June Robles Lana, direct Wen Vidaramas, and when he was when we lost him, when he died around 2014, I'm not quite sure. That's when kind of a big struggle and like a big transition towards who creates better queer stories. There are kind of the story come from because Vice gonna have worked with several other directors and nothing has clicked. But with direct June Robles Lana, finally they're able to do it and perfect and do and is able to produce not only box office worthy films but also stories and narratives that are worthy to be heard and discussed. Now let's talk about women and in Philippine cinema. Women-centered films in the Philippines often explore motherhood, migration, labor, domestic violence, sexuality, religion, poverty, resilience, and political resistance. I would like to discuss that. I think in women-centered films in the West is mostly about like being a career woman, career girly. But a lot of these stories we have are centered on motherhood. You had a lot of films with Vilma Santos as the main character, Nora Honor. to say the very least, and center not just families that are there. You have migration, and I'm gonna cite examples later on within labor and them navigating the world of having children at the same time, also in the crossroads of just being able to provide for their families, reflecting upon the stories as well and the kind of abuses they have within man. It also talks about how they seek a lot of guidance from God and the religion that they have, that as long as they would hold on, they'd be able to move past every single circumstance or every single problem that they currently face. They also talk about like poverty. Like I believe most of the women in the Philippine centered films are like poor individuals trying to get on by with their lives and having to provide for their families. You have Ang Tanging Ina. I just almost forgot that by I de las Alas. Just talks about it, raising your kids without having a husband, single mothers, and just being resilient with all the problems that you have. And a lot of the themes are, I believe, are like implicit and underlying when it comes to political resistance. But I believe the biggest struggle and problem with it is even if these films like implicitly intended for us to discuss these kinds of things, the problem is that even these celebrities do not believe that their movies are politically motivated, but like, Idols Alice themselves, who is a supporter of Duterte, that does not reflect the kind of course, the kind of respect that we ought to have with women. As we do know the background of how former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte is treating women. And while it did not extend within Philippine cinema, these are things that are implicitly also embedded within the minds of people, specifically those who follow them. You would still hear a lot of things such as that, women are meant to be mothers, women are meant to be able to take care of the household while being also able to provide for their families. The next thing is that I'm just gonna raise examples. So you have Anak. This was Vilma Santos, where they explore migrant motherhood and family sacrifice, one of the most culturally impactful OFW films. And this is where you had Claudine Barreto as well, Carlo Aquino. It's where I believe it's where the movie where you heard akala mo lang wala pero meron meron meron. And then with Claudine, wala kang alam kasi wala ka naman dito. I like it's like very iconic. Like hindi niyo ba alam habang habang nilulustay niyo ang pera ko, naghihirap ako, hindi ako kumakain, something like that. I think that is the specific line of Vilma Santos. So it just hit very close to home, considering that OFW culture with a lot of individuals becoming domestic helpers, nurses within other countries because of high export labor of the country just affected the kinds of family dynamics we currently have. And there are offsets of it. On a more contemporary extent, with Four Sisters in a Wedding, and this you have, bakit parang kasalanan ko? Or like Miss Connery is iconically saying, so are you saying I have favorites? Is this like, oh my gosh, this presentation is just literally me reciting a lot of the films that I've watched. So it examines gender roles within Filipino family dynamics, highlights emotional labor performed by women, such as that, of course, they hold a lot of problems. You have the character of Angel Locsin and Bea Alonzo fighting over a man when they were young, and then you have the dynamics between the older sister and the younger sister, between Tony Gonzaga, Teddy, and Bea Alonzo, Bobby, and then you also have other women like Shaina Magdayo's character, which just left on, like, as a middle child, just left on the sideline, such as it. You just see a lot of these struggles of specific women within their young adulthood and what do they currently face, and depending upon the story they have. And of course, a single mother navigating grief and losing your husband and being able to take care of your family and showing that you're able to raise great children while not being able to pay attention to the kind of cracks that exist within 3 years that you're not able to pay attention to. The next thing is Sunday Beauty Queen. And if you have not watched this, I recommend you to watch this. This just opens up a lot of the problems of just general Philippines. So it's the documentary about Filipino domestic workers in Hong Kong, what they do every Sunday, and shows beauty pageants as spaces of identity and empowerment. But even more so, just shows the camaraderie and like the kind of bayanihan that Filipinos have wherever they are, and just having each other's back. But this just shows you the reality of people that work outside of the country, specifically just manifesting how hard it is to be in other countries and be away with your family, and other people just thinking and thinking that you have a such an amazing life, but in fact you're doing every means for you to be able to provide for your family, knowing that they're likely limiting the kind of life that they ought to have. And the more contemporary one, which is Sunshine, which I just watched fairly recently, discusses impact of teenage pregnancy on young girls, such as that a lot of women are still pushed to be like, oh, you should just be a mother because it is a blessing, not being able to realize that it compromises a lot of things, such as their dreams, such as it is correct for you to keep the baby because of things such as morality, but also it is also important that you look at in the long term, such as that sorry, you want you want to achieve your dreams, and these are things that changes the moment motherhood enters and the moment pregnancy is, in as much as it does not disrupt a guy's life in as much as it disrupts a girl's life, more so a teenager navigating it does deepen the struggles as well of the reproductive health system in the country and how inaccessible it is, and the kind of problems that are being faced, such as that you have actual medical professionals that would indoctrinate you as well with the kind of religious beliefs they have within the medical system. It's not seeing what kind of systemic problem allows it and enables it to happen, but also reprimands and just punishes mostly women and not men in society. Let's talk about then feminist themes in Philippine cinema, and we've discussed a little bit of this insofar as the presentation is concerned. You have emotional labor. Women are often portrayed as caregivers responsible for maintaining family unity, and in MMK and even Magpakailanman, you have a lot of these stories centered on these things. You have sacrifice culture, that many films glorify women's suffering and endurance, that they need to sacrifice a specific part of their life for them to become effective mothers, or maybe on the converse they don't become mothers and sacrifice that experience and prioritize their career. More often than not is still highly criticized by society and the way it is viewed, although there are changes. And then you have migration and labor. Filipino characters are heavily tied to domestic labor, even overseas work and caregiving economies. Like there was this specific role as well where Pok Wong had their Best Actress award, and this is centered as well on being a caregiver as well and working and having disconnected children towards them going out there and being blamed for it. And a lot of family dynamics uh, are like that within the country due to the kind of work and economic culture and the economic situation of the country that is currently in the present. You also have resistance to patriarchy, and this is where modern films increasingly portray women challenging abusive systems. You have career-oriented women. You have mostly new films doing this. You also already have queer women, and then women resisting traditional marriage expectations in the present. And the last one is intersectionality, because recent films explore how class, religion, and geography shape gender experiences differently. The only example I can think about is like A Very Good Girl by Catherine Bernardo, but even like The Leader by Nadine Lustra, I believe that a specific portrayal with a young adult just navigating the world, having anxiety and etc. And just like Call Me Mother, even just already clashing and intersectional with the way again what you ought to prioritize at the time that you're very young. Queer representation then in Philippine cinema. Queer representation in Philippine media has historically existed between visibility, stereotyping, comedy, tragedy, and political advocacy. And it manifests with traditional portrayals with having flamboyant gay best friends, comic relief, tragic queer endings, and hyper feminized bakla archetype. And we've seen this as the traditional, very feminine, gay children with short shorts and like very spaghetti strap tops with like red lipstick and very red blushes and like a pin here. And the way you can easily visualize and probably point out a specific scenario or a specific film where you have these kinds of representation just means that this is where queer representation in Philippine cinema has quite ended, insofar as the criticism led us to the kind of progress we do have right now. So now we have a more shift towards nuanced representation because independent films and modern media increasingly portray queer intimacy. You also have trans experiences, which we're very, very happy about, queer family structures and struggles, and you've seen that in the recent films of Vice Ganda, political struggles as well with Die Beautiful, and then rural queer identities. And again, while a lot of these films in mainstream is still pretty isolated, such as that, there are only a few that does pretty well within the box office. It's important that these stories continuously be made and discussed because when it comes to media, the more people talk about it, the more we're able to correct it, but also the more these narratives just re-echo the kind of realistic stories that are present on the ground. Now let's talk about Vaikunda and its impact. And I think that this is the one of the most important and something that I truly, truly want to kind of generally discuss, such as that Vaikunda is one of the most influential queer media figures in the Philippine entertainment history. They became significant because of three things. Their openly queer celebrities previously faced major limitations, and mainstream success demonstrated commercial viability of queer-led entertainment, such as that you need to always be palatable, something that Vice Ganda is no longer afraid to do so. But Vice transformed the bakla comedian archetype into a leading celebrity brand, such as that the moment you say gay or queer, Vice Ganda is an automatic thing in mind. There is no one that currently just tops off the kind of stardom and appeal Vice Ganda still has, such as that no matter what they say and what they do is something that the masses could accept the kind of appeal they have, even if there are criticism and hate. But the following and support is still like more massive than the kind of hate that is pushed in comparison to in the past, where of course a lot of people have a lot of um objection and aversiveness towards Vice Ganda. The significance is that Vice normalized queer centrality in mainstream Filipino entertainment, and I would like to quote AC here to say that it is amazing to see that the dominating afternoon show in a religious country like the Philippines is led by a queer individual, which is Vice Ganda. What are the critics with criticism towards Vice Ganda films is that sometimes or back then in the past it reinforced a kind of stereotypes that currently exist, but I'd like to think it was a byproduct of their time, relying on body shaming humor as well. And again, these are things that Vice Ganda have been criticized for and have been learning slowly apart. You ought to be familiar of the Jessica Soho incident. Use class-based insult as well. This is where again the puksaan kind of strategy that people really hate. And then prioritize commercialization over advocacy, such as that there were limits within the representation that they had to still appeal with the commercial success, such as you cannot anger every single individual that currently exists and dilute queer politics into entertainment. Yeah, so it's still making comic relief and it's pretty indirect, such as I believe now there is a progress and Vice Ganda is no longer just monotone. And it's very important that the very, very familiar and influential household name is speaking up about things such as Soji Bill and even just general corruption that the country is currently facing in mainstream media. Now then, we talk about cultural impact that they have, that change the Philippine celebrity culture and the kind of supporting that they have. Of course, queer visibility. Now it's normal to see a gay individual that is not just a sidekick, but a protagonist, the lead of the show. Mainstream comedy as well, and change the kind of comedy and the way there is reverence and respect towards Philippine comedy and entertainment economics and just having a huge amount of support and following from all classes. I'm quite unsure with the more the above um classes, but when it comes to middle class like, and the masses, they're really captured by this entertainment economics. Just specific filmography that you can remember on is that Private Benjamin is where they're able to explore the story of like a soldier or a gay individual growing up in a soldier family and just proving that being a man or showing how man you are is about just showing up and not about like your gender identity, and it's about being able to defend your country without fear and being courageous about that, but being like having humility in the kind of success that you have. Girl Boy Bakla Tomboy, and I'm so happy that it has resurfaced back on TikTok because apart from it's so ahead of its time when it was produced. If you watch the film, it also talks about family dynamics with how divided families, separated families are able to talk about and how it is being experienced by queer kids, such as gay individuals trying to carry the lack of a father figure in the household. The same way, the struggles of a mother to be able to just take care of families and being away from their actual children. But I think, and this is one of my favorite films, Girl Boy Bakla Tomboy, is just extremely funny, but also at the same time you've learned a lot of things. And just a specific thing, I don't know what you do with this back matter, but the trip to Jerusalem scene where all of the four of them finally saw each other, it took 8 hours because Vice Ganda was the only one acting as Girl Boy Baklaton Boy. But the amount of artistry and energy for an individual to be able to separate themselves into four distinct individuals in a movie is just like not baffling but amazing to me. And I believe Vice Ganda doesn't get much flowers for this specific film. And it is something that I can rewatch so much that it just renamed and just I feel like talk directly to a lot of queer individuals and just change the way representation is. And of course, you have the traditional Petrang Kabayo is with you being kind and treating other people regardless of the success that you have, such as that, yes, there are stereotypes that are produced there, but it just talks about morality and just like being kind individual. You have super parental guardians and you being able to provide care for individuals not by based on blood but your choice and ability to do it, and of course call me mother in the present that just shifted the way we discuss and view motherhood in this contemporary society. That is motherhood just about being able to take you out in this world. It's about taking care of you, like the consistency, but like motherhood and just the existence of it is about just love, the labor of love and the care and the amount of affection you exist and your ability to sacrifice for this. And it is not limited to specific gender because motherhood is a duty and a responsibility an individual is ought to be facing. This is like the kind of film that really opens up us towards that. Now then, what are the film strategies that are used in media? First, his star power strategy is still highly reliant upon recognizable celebrities to attract mass audiences. So, of course, famous people are the ones that brings a lot of people in cinema. You have emotional narrative strategy. Filipino films often emphasize sacrifice, family conflict, melodrama, emotional catharsis. So again, the confrontation scenes that are repetitively employed within these stories that are key towards the rising action of stories. And then queer coding and camp. Queer aesthetics are often used to exaggerated fashion, humor, theatricality, double meanings, such as that. You know, when you create these films, it's the same way how queer people or queer individuals are actually being treated in society, such as they have to always be more and cannot be less. And of course, the relatability strategy. Films create mass appeal through colloquial humor, recognizable family situation, urban rural familiarity, and of course, media is always reflective of the trends that currently exist, but also mirrors a lot of the realities and stories of the people. That is why accuracy is very important, and commercial success is still also dependent upon it connecting towards a lot of individuals in on the ground, such as that you cannot demean media because media really is one of the biggest connection of individuals towards each other, especially now with the digital media and the digital scene. Conclusion then. This is a very short presentation. I want you to take two things from this presentation, such as that gendered media in the Philippines reveals how cinema is never just entertainment. It's talk about like purposeful. So films shape gender expectation, political attitude, queer visibility, social norms, and cultural memory, such as that while we don't have Soji Bell, we have such a huge amount of representation and memory towards a lot of these representations. But while we could still improve, we aren't stagnated. We're able to see these figures, and it is very important that we reinforce them and continue to support them and reflect them on political success. But also, the evolution of women centered and queer centered Filipino films demonstrates even in the present, increasing visibility, such as that it can still improve, but ongoing struggles over representation, we also have shifted the kind of representation we have, such as that it's not just bare minimum and unsatisfactory that you're just a queer best friend, but also tensions between profit and advocacy. Because again, money sometimes have tension within it, such as that we also have success stories where you can do both with heavy advocacy and heavy profit, but also conflicts between censorship and artistic freedom, such as that you want to tell very authentic queer and women-centered stories, but you have regulatory boards like MTRCB that are not in favor of it, such as well the artistic freedom to push it through without it being public is something that you also risk. With that being said, Shilamet Pros, I hope you learned something from this CAP lecture series. If you have any question, you can shoot me an email or send me a Facebook message. Thank you so much, everyone, and good luck in PITC. And hopefully, this does help in the media set or the some of the motions that you push. Yeah, thank you very much.